is our final one of the day. And we're really lucky to have our Director for Public Health, Mark Adams, joining us today. We've had a huge amount of interest in this, well, all of the seminars, but this one as well. And so we really appreciate your time, Mark, because it's not like you've got anything else to do in a worldwide pandemic. So you may as well just be here with us, mate.
Yeah, that's true.
So we really appreciate you coming today, and we appreciate everybody who's taken part in this today. So just as usual, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and the only one is can everybody please join with their microphones off and their audio off. It's just that we're expecting an awful lot of people, and it does affect the sound quality that we've got. So if you could just go all onto mute and all onto take your videos off, and then only join as and when you're asking the questions and stuff. So thanks again, Mark. Thanks for joining us today. It must be quite busy for you at the moment, is it?
It's just a little bit busy. I don't know what it was called on the invitation, but I said to my wife, "Oh, I've got to. Do you know what my next meeting is?" She said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "It's an audience with Mark Adams," and she said a sweary word. It's a sweary word. She wasn't very impressed. I said it wasn't my idea, and she said, "I bet it was," but it wasn't.
Oh, well, we really appreciate you coming. Oh, do you know, Mark, when I thought of this idea, I thought normally in your first, I mean, you've been with us. How long have you been in post now? About a year.
Yeah, I started on March the 23rd, the day that Boris locked the country down. So on my first day, I went in, picked up my laptop, came home, and that was it, really.
So I was thinking, and normally as a Director for Public Health, your first year would be out and about meeting people and doing the tour of duty and getting to know everybody, but we just haven't had those opportunities to meet you yet, really, because obviously because of lockdown. So I was just wondering, would you start off with just like a little introduction about yourself, Mark, just how you got to the job and just a little bit about you, just so we can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, so if I start with so I've worked in Redcar and Cleveland for a long time. I think the goes back before this, but without starting with what O levels I did and all that sort of stuff. I was responsible for the Redcar Primary Care Hospital. So worked in what was Redcar and Cleveland PCT at the time. Worked in the health service for 20 years, and then from that moved to a role within the Middlesbrough, Redcar and Cleveland Community Services. So working with Stephen Charles, who now heads up the North of England commissioning support team, to try to wrestle control of the community services bit of what was in the PCTs at that time to form a new organisation more connected to communities and to give greater heft to those sort of services that generally tended to be the kind of Cinderella services of the acute sector or the mental health sector, and that I think I could probably experience the heavy hand of what was the regional health authority and other bits of the system that said all the right things but ultimately weren't particularly supportive of what we were doing, and I left that ultimately didn't succeed in terms of setting up a community foundation trust, but we did loads of work to get along the way, and austerity in 2008 kind of really put the kibosh on a lot of that and changed the goalposts for a lot of things. So I moved from there into public health in 2010. There seems to be quite a theme of timing with political or national events, because I think I started on the 7th of June. I know that because it's my mum's birthday, and the election had been the month before, where they'd said there would be no reorganisation of the health service in 2010, if you remember back then when it was the coalition government. And I think it was the day after I started, they said we're reorganising in public health, moving into the local authority. So I went from being in the health service into public health, learning what it was because I didn't have a background in public health there, to in 2013 moving into the local authority into Redcar and Cleveland, which was a little bit traumatic. And I guess in terms of what we're talking about, well-being, that sense of control or not having any control over that element of my career, it was quite difficult to start off with. In fact, I disappeared for a secondment to Durham and Darlington Foundation Trust and did some work there with their front of house stuff in paediatrics, and then in Redcar and Cleveland there was a push to put me through what's called the portfolio route in public health, which involves doing a master's in public health, and it's basically glorified NVQ, but they don't really like to call it that. So it's all of your experience and your qualifications against a set of sort of criteria, which I'd seen a lot of other people go through and moan about it all the time, and I was determined that I wouldn't be the same person that went through it and moaned about how hard it was. Within about 3 weeks of doing it, I was moaning about how hard it was. So that shows how much I'm able to stick to my guns. But so I went through that and eventually got on the UK Public Health Register, which then makes me eligible to be either a public health consultant or a director of public health. In the intervening period, we had South Tees Public Health, which meant that the role that they were trying to kind of nurse me into, which was the Director of Public Health in Redcar Cleveland, didn't exist anymore, because now we had a South Tees Director of Public Health that was Edward Kanonga, and obviously a great Director of Public Health. And then when he moved on to his other role, I applied to this job, and as I say, started on the 23rd of March. And then the rest is history about being a DPH in a pandemic, which somebody said it's a great learning experience, isn't it? Which I think is true. but
That's one way to put it,
yeah.
Not necessarily the learning experience I'd want to go through, but I'm glad it's you, not me. So thank you for coming today. So obviously we were launching the Wellbeing Mark, and we just would like to get, you know, some of your views, some of your ideas, and some of your vision for what wellbeing means, and how can we roll it out across the whole of South Tees. I mean, you've been supportive of this from day one, which we massively appreciate. And I think just listening to your own experiences there, you've been very much at the heart of services across the South of Tees. So you've obviously got the people at your heart, and listening to what you've just said there totally makes sense as to why you really feel that well-being's important. So far, I mean, obviously, well-being's, Joanne alluded this, well-being can be seen as a bit fluffy. If I say the word well-being to you, what does that mean for you, Mark? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think I was looking at some of your materials as well. There was I think it was the ONS measures of well-being, which include life satisfaction, is your life worthwhile? How happy are you? And what sense of anxiety do you feel? And I think almost all of those can be unpacked. Kind of how satisfied are you? Well, compared to what? If if the ultimate measure of satisfaction is being Jeff Bezos or something like that, well, then I'm not very happy. But if satisfaction is taking the dogs for a walk in the morning and listening to the birds sing and having friends and having a sense of purpose, well, then I'm very happy. So I think I think that sort of sense of purpose is important. I don't mean that you're driven to invent something or anything like that, but it's the work that you do is something that you believe in. You think it's important, and that could be working in a supermarket. It's just important that we've seen the shift in what a key worker is and who society thinks important through COVID. That all of a sudden these people that economically are treated very poorly by society suddenly became the real key workers, whether it be delivery drivers or people that work in supermarkets or whatever. And I think that's absolutely true. I don't think the economy works for the people that are actually really, really important in society, which is part of the reason why I'm interested in being in public health. And I think linked to that is a sense of control. I think well-being, what control you've got over your own life and choices that you make is really important to your sense of well-being. And if you've got very little control, then it's very difficult to have that sense of satisfaction and happiness and feeling worthwhile and all that sort of stuff. And then I guess there's something about being able to cope with the things that life inevitably throws at you. So the question about anxiety, if you are anxious, then the mechanisms you've got to cope with being anxious are really important as well. So I quite often have days where you look ahead and you think, I've got this meeting, and I've never seemed to have enough time to prepare properly for things. So quite often I'll feel quite anxious, and maybe the night before feel a little bit anxious. And I do use the mindfulness type of approach, which is very straightforward, but just sort of being at peace for without sounding like a Buddhist monk, being at peace for literally a minute and just listening to your breathing. And I find that works really, it puts a little bit of perspective around it and just helps sort of center yourself a little bit. But if you've got anxiety that aren't that, be it debt or some of those broad things, they're kind of there all the time, aren't they? It's not like a difficult day that you've got to get through. It's just permanently creating issues for you, and managing that is a different set of skills that are required, and some practical support to help you do it.
Yeah, we were talking just about that the other day, about this. you know, there are structures that do limit people's well-being, and it's how can we give people the agency to work around those structures and manage them into their lives. So we obviously, our main goal is always to make, you know, people's lives better and to give them the skills they need to improve their well-being. And some of that is understanding what is confining them and how can they work around that. And I think that's probably a really good, I mean, for my mind, I don't know about anybody else, it's a really good focus for services out there, because I feel that, you know, services sometimes take one aspect of person's life and do an absolutely amazingly brilliant job at that, but then not necessarily see how it fits into the bigger picture. Do you think if services were to put a bigger focus on well-being, we might be able to start to change? Because we've talked about holistic services for a long time, haven't we? Do you think there's a way that well-being could be worked into existing services, that we can drive it forward as a whole package?
Yeah, I think that's quite difficult to do, but I think it's the sort of approach that we should have. So you'll know about the Transformation Challenge program that works with individuals in some very, very difficult circumstances, and actually fundamentally starts with building a relationship with that person to understand what the critical issues are. And generally, it's things like debt or substance misuse or mental health issues. And actually, once I kind of liken it a little bit to quietening some of the noise around. You know, once you've got all those sort of things going on in your life, it's very difficult. You know, to talk about people making the right choices and all the rest of it. It's very difficult to make any sort of choice if you've got all that sort of stuff going on and all the stress and anxiety that all that causes. And our Transformation Challenge team just people that are really good at building relationships with people. And I think what we tend to see is once they've done the practical stuff of sorting out the debt and getting programs, and I know other services and other teams do this as well, to sort out the debt or sort out the housing problem or sort out the, you know, taking them, supporting them to access what support there is for substance misuse and other issues. Once you've got that platform, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, isn't it? Once you've got some of those very basic things resolved, then you've got a bit of a platform to start thinking about other things. So we see people that have been in very difficult circumstances volunteering or finding employment or having a stable housing situation, some of these things that other people might take for granted, but that gives a platform to then start to rediscover well-being in your life, rather than being in this kind of we talk about I think that the idea of this moving from surviving to thriving, you know, I think if you're in that situation, you're just surviving day to day, everybody deserves the opportunity to thrive in whatever that means for them. And I think that kind of platform of well-being and that base level of being able to make choices and all that sort of thing, which is clouded by all these other things, is absolutely critical. How we build that into services, I guess, is part of how the network's able to share those techniques and the like. I didn't mention before that I'm also chair of the Junction Foundation, which is a VCS organisation in Wrexham, Cleveland, but works into Middlesbrough and Hartlepool and various other places as well. And I think one of the things that I learned from working with them before I became more heavily involved with them was, I think, and this is a massive generalisation, but I think in general, VCS organisations are geared around relationships. They make relationships with people, and they make long-term relationships with people. So the Junction works with people now, helping them into employment. They first started working with them as a young carer, you know, and they've got that long-term relationship. And I think that the public sector services have tended to be more transactional, which makes this whole because they're all geared around counting things and accounting for yourself and accounting for the resources that are going into it. And that kind of transactional approach makes it very difficult to consider the well-being and the holistic nature of the person. So if you're dealing with, I don't know, if you're on a parenting course or something like that, and we presume that, I know it doesn't quite work like that, but we presume that 12 sessions of a parenting course is going to fix a lifetime of getting you to the point where you're perhaps, you know, struggling to be a good parent, and we all struggle to be good parents. It needs to be something a little bit more holistic. So I think it's a massive ask, but I think it's really important. Yeah,
I think you talked right there. We've got a couple of comments there, Mark. I think the first one was about GPs, and that was from Mary from Age UK, you know, and about bringing GPs on board with the issue of well-being. And I think she's, you know, making that comment that, you know, and GPs are very much struggle for time. We all know that. They've got a hard job, and is it 7 minutes or something? But I think she's hitting something right there.
But the social prescribers are critical to that, aren't they? Sorry, Richie.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, not at all. I was just going to say that it's mentioned about the issues with antidepressants, and I think that would be referring to the over prescription of antidepressants, which is a recent report has suggested has doubled again during lockdowns, which is, it's not necessarily, we always make the point, don't we, that it's not that antidepressants aren't necessarily often aren't the solution long term. There always needs to be the well-being elements alongside it. So they are a means to help, often they'll save lives, I'm sure, but the context of that, whether or not GPs can be, I suppose, involved in the network or.
I think we've got the primary care networks, haven't we? The 6 primary care networks across South Tees and public health are quite well connected, but into some more than others. But we're looking to get better connected, and I think it's about thinking that the practice isn't just the GP. I appreciate that they're the only ones that are prescribing antidepressants, but things like the social prescribers that we provide through Transformation Challenge and mine provide to the other primary care networks as well, and those roles will grow, and we're working together to share learning and understand how that works. And I guess the network is another opportunity to further do that in terms of how we're able to support people best. I think people turn up to their GP because it's the point that they know. It might not be the best person necessarily, but as long as they know who the best person or people are, then that's a useful interaction. So we've got to acknowledge that that's the point of contact that people will go to if they feel at that point of desperation. I guess there's a point about how do we, what's available before you get to that point of desperation, so that there's something that more positive can be done before you get into that sort of situation. But I think the networks will be open to being involved in the wellbeing network.
Bearing in mind that a lot of the things like financial well-being, and I've always been aware that we're up against an industry that ultimately capitalizes on the misery of people, bearing in mind what makes people happy and what doesn't, and it is subjective, but ultimately piling debt upon debt with high levels of interest rates and so on, whilst we're trying to find solutions to it. That's a very well-funded industry that survives on the, like I said, on the basis of doing people's well-being down rather than, and so what do you think the challenges are in terms of what we're up against in terms of the scale of problems like that?
I think, well, it's hard, isn't it? I think the underlying issues around poverty and that sort of thing are just sort of pervasive in our area, unfortunately. And I think the mechanics that we can think a little bit more broadly can help, and it might only be at the margins. But for example, we're the whole COVID thing as if you look at it in a particular way, has opened up employment opportunities in terms of the test centres or the vaccination sites and all the rest of it. So we're trying to connect that into Kickstart to support younger people into some of those roles. So it'll be marginal, but if we consider that sort of approach in everything that we do, and the social value charters and the like, in terms of retaining resources in the communities that we work in, we can, places like Plymouth and Ayrshire have been really successful at that. We can actually start to have an effect about retaining resources and skills, things like the South Tees Development Corporation, ensuring that local people have the skills to take the opportunities up when they arise. And there's loads of VCS organisations. I saw Lynn Pallister came up from Frog, and they work with people in those communities to support them as much as they possibly can to be able to access those opportunities. So there's a whole ecosystem of people supporting. I guess it's how do we work together to amplify it and support that rather than getting in each other's way, which is another purpose of the network, really, isn't it?
Yeah, yes it is.
Yeah, and I like Julie's point about how do we become more proactive and less reactive. And I think, moving out to the lockdown, I think Julie's got, that's the kind of key area that the wellbeing network I would like it to take. It's about that innovation, being in a unique position, pulling everybody together and coming up with more of a proactive than a reactive response. So hopefully that that would be a key part of the network. Do you think there's any opportunity, Mark, for the network to have an influence at those more decision making and commissioning level? Any opportunities for us to link directly with that? Because obviously we're aiming to have lots of people on the cold face, and we'll have so much anecdotal evidence of what life's like in Middlesbrough, Redcar and Cleveland. and I've worked in communities for years and years, and quite often top-down strategies come and they're not always appropriate to our communities. But what we're going to harvest here is a huge amount of information, like as we're getting on the side of the chat comments here already, this is what I'm seeing already, and this is only seminar 3. Will there be an opportunity for us to harvest all of that information from our local staff and volunteers and feed that upwards, do you think?
Yeah, I think we have to try to change the narrative around this, because it shouldn't really be feeding upwards, although I know why you use, because we should be equal
right,
partners in this, really, shouldn't we? And actually, if those commissioning or partnering, or whatever the kind of word you use in terms of bringing services into being, aren't aware of what need they're trying to satisfy, or what support's required, or what connections are required, or whatever it is, then that work isn't going to be as rich as it could be. So I think this has to be part of it. I mean, again, I must stop linking everything back to COVID, but it has been pretty all pervasive for the past few months. But we've got COVID champions in both areas, and the key aim of those is to it's kind of messages out in terms of what to do to keep your friends and your family and yourself safe, and all that sort of stuff, and moving on to sort of countering some of the vaccine myths, but also, and equally importantly, bringing back what is it that's making it difficult to isolate in a community if you're a case, or if you're a contact, which will be around the finances of it and all that sort of stuff, and other issues that we're not aware of. So I think it's really a community development approach to it, isn't it? That what the network will be a critical part of helping us to understand what's missing in communities, or what needs amplifying in communities, or what's being done, what we're doing wrong, that we potentially should stop doing, and how that works. So I think it has to be a part of that. I mean, the Health and Wellbeing Board, obviously you presented to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and the network was part of the population intervention triangle around the policies, and we've talked about social value, and the services and the community. So this is very much the community element of that, and those 3 things are kind of equivalent points of the triangle. So the Health and Wellbeing Board's already cited on it, so it's already been upwards, if we want to think of it in those terms. And I think there's a trick, isn't there, about how do you collate all of the experience and all that sort of stuff into a coherent narrative when it isn't particularly coherent, without losing the richness of it. So I think there's work to do to think how we go about doing that, but I think it has to become a critical forum. That it's almost back to that sense of purpose, isn't it, and control. If the network doesn't feel that it's able to influence, let's say sideways rather than upwards, if it doesn't feel it's able to influence sideways, then what's the purpose? What's the I know it's got more than that, but that would be a real sense of being able to achieve something that perhaps until now has been difficult, with a whole load of disparate voices, that the network gives greater heft and greater coherence to that, to those voices. So I think that's really critical, but again, extremely difficult to do, but we should ensure that we stick to our guns and try as hard as we possibly can, and take the victories that we can where we get them, and until it becomes just a fundamental part of how we operate.
I think that's, it is hard. I mean, obviously we've tried for years and years to do, and we've had some valuable stuff, but I think there's such the fact that there's so many people on this call just goes to prove how willing people are. And every time I go to a national conference, and I've gone to them for years, the North East is always ahead of the game, and I'm quite proud to be part of that. So I think you're right. I think it is hard. It's not going to be easy to harvest all that information and get it to the right people in the right format that they need it. But I do think that's something I would really love to push for, because I think that's when we'll really start to understand what we can do. Just had a few more comments come through on the side there, Mark, and I can't listen to what you're saying and read at the same time, which I've just discovered is a skill I lack. So obviously we've got mentioned about the social prescribers in Middlesbrough doing a great job, and I think that's really key, isn't it? That's another thing, that the social prescribing element has been something we've talked about for many years. So it's absolutely amazing to hear what an impact that's having on people, and I think they have got that overall holistic view of people, which is something we've always wanted to work towards. And I'm hoping that the social prescribers will play a huge part in the Wellbeing Network moving forward.
And I think just on that, I think it's really interesting that it's really clear that the GPs value them, which sounds quite obvious, but wasn't a given that would be the case. I mean, it could just be a kicking the issue over the fence kind of thing and not paying anything. But I think that they're really part of the running of the practice in all 6 primary care network areas. I think they're really valued by the practice, which demonstrates that there's an issue that's been, as you say, has been known about for a long time, and we've got something that is working and changing as it learns, which is really important.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear that. It's an interesting one from Terry here. You know, I've got no idea what you're talking about, Terry, here. Compassionate communities and how they link into asset-based community development. Do you want to unmute Terry for a bit and just give us a little backdrop on that one?
Yeah. Hello. All right, Mark. How are you doing?
Hi, Terry. How are you? I thought you were on a witness
protection
program for a minute there. You were very silhouetted.
Yeah.
I can see you now.
It's the concept. I asked the question, Mark, are you aware of the work of Dr. Julian Abell and compassionate communities?
No, I haven't.
Check out his TED talk. It's about 15 minutes long, and it's the importance of compassion within our communities and how it links into social prescribing. He's done a lot of groundbreaking work down in Somerset as a practicing GP. And it's tying in the dual benefits of working with a social prescribing model, whereby most people who go to a GP surgery, you know, the doctors themselves generally will admit that they don't need a script. They need linking into a community group. And if we tie that in with the, you know, I know you like asset-based community development the same as I do, Mark. And when we combine the two of these things, by God, we don't have to see shifts in our community.
Yeah, well, I'll check that out. Yeah, and I think compassion is the thing that we don't hear very much about, but it's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Good on you, Mark. Good on you.
Thanks for that, Terry.
Terry, I've made a note.
Do you know what? Just talking to Terry lifts me up. I don't care. You can tell me about what was on Emmerdale last night, and I'd still feel happier at the end of it. Thanks, Terry. So we've got some a recommendation from Jane. Jane from Tees Valley as well. Health Connections Mendip Project website and their accompanying book is really useful. Maybe you could send us a link out to that, Jane. That would be great. And something from Jane. Joanne sent us over a podcast for children's wellbeing. I think that'll, if it's come from Joanne, that'll be so interesting. So we'll all have to maybe jump on and watch that one later. Sarah, I think we've got to mention the pandemic and its relation to wellbeing and mental health. I think we'll be totally remiss, wouldn't we? So Sarah's point is the pandemic has impacted our communities in different ways, but one thing we can already see is an increased demand for basic needs, which will consequently impact an individual's wellbeing. How are we preparing and planning to deal with the increased needs of our communities? I think that is a key element, isn't it? I think we all know. I mean, going back to the old-fashioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's going to be so much, and I don't think we've seen the start of it really yet. I think. Yeah,
I think there's a long-term people that haven't been able to access general NHS services either through March, April, May, and the original first wave of the pandemic, through to where we are now. That some of those services being crowded out by people with COVID in the hospital setting, but that mental health, be it there was an article in the news last night, wasn't it? With a school in Outwood Ormsby, I think it was, that
I saw that.
Kids experiencing grief and being bereaved and down to isolation and loneliness. You know, obviously literally we're having to isolate and but also feeling, and I remember reading somewhere about loneliness isn't necessarily a lack of being around people. You can be lonely and around people if you don't connect to them in some way. So I think there's probably a difference between isolate and some people can be isolated and perfectly happy in their own company. So there's a difference between being isolated and lonely. But I was talking to the to people from the university on Wednesday about some of their issues around COVID and how we can support them, and they were talking about students feeling lonely, and obviously that will happen all the time anyway, but it's not. It wasn't a group that I'd particularly thought of as being lonely, because you think of loneliness as being a kind of older person's problem, but clearly either people who are on Teesside and have come from somewhere else and don't have a local network, and they're accessing all of the content online in the main. Loneliness and the sort of desperation that can come with that is a really important issue. And we talked yesterday, didn't we, that we'll connect the Wellbeing Network into the university to ensure, because what they were saying was that there's a lot of online stuff, but there was very little kind of actual connection face to face, not in the same room necessarily, but with a person that you're talking to. So I think that and the longer term impact of some of the mental health issues of grief, anxiety, all of it's almost every box is ticked from a mental health perspective through COVID. And I guess that the sort of counter to that is the way that communities have responded to that, both sort of rallying around to support neighbours, clapping for carers, clapping for key workers. I think the trick is how you keep that. It's back to Terry's point about compassion. How do you keep that compassion, and tap it? It's there, isn't it? It's there in all of us. How do we stop the cynicism and nastiness of social media corroding that compassion that we all have for each other in the main? And how do we amplify and support and draw strength from that? Because that's the counter to it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and I do think people want to be involved. I mean, Mark, a year ago, I set up a group and basically all I wanted, I'd moved to Redcar a few years back, and I didn't really have loads of friends over here, so I set up the Ladies' Laughter and Leisure at the Cleveland Bay, just thinking, I just find maybe 5 or 6 ladies and we'll just go for a pint one night or something. That's what I was thinking. Honestly, Mark, 430 people have now joined our group, and it's a group that you wouldn't traditionally put as being lonely. A lot of them work, but a lot of them leave work on a Friday night and don't see another soul until they start work on Monday. And currently, if people are working at home, you don't even see anybody. They don't see anybody in the working week either. So I think loneliness cuts across the traditional people, but the traditional groups that we often associate with it as well.
That example, Sharon.
Sorry.
That example there about digital and sort of connecting at a digital level, like the positive sides of social media. Mark, has there been much chat about kind of what the future might look like in terms of how we, the benefits of how we've had to do things differently? So counselling has been done on the telephone, and we've heard reports that a lot of that's been quite positive. Actually, I accessed counselling earlier on this year. That was on the phone. It allowed me to talk about things that would be much more difficult face to face, to look someone in the eye and do it. So, but we keep hearing lots of stories about people who are engaging now who probably wouldn't have engaged before because of that opportunity. Is that being discussed and is that being considered in terms of changing allocation of resources and so on? Or?
Yeah, I mean that there's part of the I can't remember what it was called. There's people refer to it as the Simon Stevens letter in the NHS, because everybody, it's so kind of hierarchical. Everybody's frightened of the main, the chief exec of the NHS, about rebooting services and kind of recovery post COVID. And there's a big element of that about digital. And I guess the bit that I'm equally interested in is digital exclusion. And if services undoubtedly work for some people better digitally, and my daughter accessed those psychological therapy services, and actually I think probably wouldn't have accessed them if she had to actually go to a place, but the fact she can do it originally on the phone and then kind of online in a sort of chat thing that basically meant she didn't have to get out of bed, I think appealed a lot more than having to get up and get ready and go out. So for her it was a much more accessible way of getting some techniques to help her manage anxiety and all that sort of stuff. So it's just understanding them as a set of different modalities, isn't it? I think it's very easy that we think, I don't know what it is about our brains, but we kind of think that there's a solution to it, and this thing seems to work, let's just do this thing. And that's not quite what the NHS letter says. It does talk about digital exclusion as well. Yes. But I think we've got to be careful we don't embrace, well, I think we should embrace new ways of doing things, but be careful and understand who can't or doesn't or won't embrace that sort of method. And it's not always age related, but some of it is. And what else is required for people where that isn't the best way of accessing that support, or for people that are accessing support in that way but need the next level up that requires something a little bit more holistic and face to face and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's there's different ways of delivering service, and even this. A year or so ago, this would have been just impossible. We wouldn't have thought that we could do this because it wouldn't work and all that sort of stuff. And we've proved, I mean, there are downsides to it that you I've got several pressure sores from sitting in the same spot for 10 hours a day, but we won't go into
too much information.
Yeah. but now we can use all this technology. So what does, when we're into the recovery mode of the pandemic, what's the balance between working from home and this sort of approach to things, and the reduction in traffic on the roads and improved air quality and all that sort of stuff, and being together and working together and seeing each other and having a community in terms of how we work? What's the balance behind that? I'd hate to think that we don't hear talk of the new normal anymore, but whatever the new normal is going to be, I'd hate to think it's basically just like the old normal, because I think there's plenty that we can learn and develop and grow from it, and it's just trying to ensure we take the best from it and make up for whatever shortfalls or whatever people can't use it or don't want to. Even if you don't want to, that's fine. So in the same way as not everybody's necessarily working from home because either they haven't got Wi-Fi or they just can't cope with working from home, then there's a opportunity to work in an office environment at the moment. So it's just being sensitive to that. Really, it's almost compassion is probably the word of that Terry's introduced into the session, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just making sure that we're thoughtful about what works best for the people that we're trying to help.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, I'm not sure what K Phoenix, I'm not sure what the K stands for, but I'm just going to bring you to the point that K's this. Does anybody know what K stands for in K Phoenix? But the point that's being made about children, and obviously children are being taught online at the moment, Mark. So that's
Kerry.
really Kerry. Kerry, do you want to unmute Kerry, and then we can at least
We do need to talk about younger people, don't we?
have a little chat about this one, because I think Mark will be really interested in the point you've made, Kerry.
Yeah, it was just I'd read in the news article at the start of the week about how self-harm has gone up in younger children, and children as young as 8. And again, they've got social media. There's a lot that they're seeing and a lot that to answer for. But even trying to asphyxiation. But where in the setting that I work, we've got counsellors who are speaking to children via Zoom meetings, phoning them. But we're finding some children are reluctant to take that up, and I don't know if it's because at school people from home are not there. That's their setting, and then to do that at home where the parents are, they just don't feel comfortable, and it's mixing the two together.
Yeah, I think that's the point, isn't it, about what works for people. So if that's okay if you've got a private space or if you've got access to the kit to do it, but if you have to make a big song and dance to get access to the kit that asks a whole lot of questions that you don't want to be talking to your parents or whoever about, then that makes it quite difficult, doesn't it? And I think young people and the impact on education and community and all those sort of things are absolutely true. And I guess we're just starting to feel through what the implications of that are going to be, because that is a pretty stressful time for a younger person. Again, with all the anxiety over what's going to happen to grandma and grandpa and all that kind of stuff, in addition to complete disruption to the school day and the broadening of that inequalities, where we've seen the Institute of Fiscal Studies report that there's a disparity, sort of social gradient to the hours of teaching kids got at home, depending upon the kind of income of the parents, which is down to ability to be able to do that, kit you've got to be able to support you to do it, capability you've got as a parent to do it, and all sorts of other factors. So I think children are particularly affected by the pandemic, and how we work our way through that is going to involve all of the partners that you're pulling together into the Wellbeing Network and beyond, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. We've got a comment there from Nikki Crombie as well. It's a positive thing to come out of COVID that we're trying different ways to engage with people. We need to be able to keep the different range of connecting with people post-COVID. Was there a specific reason why you brought that up, Nikki, or have you got anything that you would like to share around that?
Not particularly, just that in our experience we've found you know, traditionally we were a face-to-face service, but going through COVID and having to do things online or meeting people for walks in the park to talk through their issues and things like that has just opened our eyes that there's a myriad of different ways that we can engage with people going forwards, and you know, try to hang on to something positive out of all of the last 12 months. And we have really found you know, having that range of ways of engaging with people feels like it's going to be very significant going forwards, because absolutely, like you say, one size does not fit all, but to be able to offer people different ways of coming in to benefit from the services that our different partner organisations can provide has got to be a positive.
Yeah. Vicky, me little whippet, you found that phones have been a barrier to services. Did you want to let us know a little bit more about that?
Hi Sharon, it is Vicky here. The comment that was made by our lovely Victoria, one of our other directors as well.
Oh,
but
right.
Yes, it is true. A lot of neurodivergent people do find phones a barrier, and a way of contacting people on a wider range would be a lot better.
Such as what, through like messaging through social media, that sort of thing, or?
Yeah, absolutely, Richie. Yeah.
So I agree. I mean,
it's a lot of. Sorry, Victoria. No. There's, say, mental health crises service. A lot of those things require initial access via phones, and for a lot of us in the community, neurodivergent community, it's a massive barrier. It's even down to accessing the GP and things like that. And people don't realise it because it's taken for granted that you can speak on a phone. And a lot of us can't sometimes.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and you sometimes think the old-fashioned technologies like phones are the easiest, and then you just pointed out, and it's not. So no. I think it is about us learning all of this and bringing this all together, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again,
really
we can feature that within the network and focus on those areas, because I suspect there's probably a lot of people affected by that. There is
a massive amount, that people don't realise.
Yes, and I'm sure the solutions are simple. It's just a case of offering on top of the telephone call, you know, other ways of people getting in contact. We've seen some really good examples, though. I mean, someone put a comment there that a lot more males have been, their perception is more males have accessed services where they haven't had to do face-to-face, or it's easy just to do it from the phone, not calling, but messaging. We've seen a number of Facebook groups like Find the Light, Walk and Talk, who while they can't do their activities, have actually set up Facebook groups. And even this morning, there was a guy that posted, and I replied to him about his difficulties, that he's really starting to end up with depression because he can't exercise through an injury and so on. And he was able to be supported. And he said, I wouldn't normally even post like this, and I certainly wouldn't talk about it. That's very telling, isn't it, in terms of kind of not losing these things as we go forward. So I agree with everything like that. And I've made a note as well for the phone use of neurodivergent. So yeah, that's.
And I think that issue of stigma as well it's a lot better than it was, but it's still an issue, isn't it? That about people accessing services or accessing support, or even knowing that there is support available. And I think the network's got a big role in changing the kind of dialogue about that sort of thing. That mental health's equally important as physical health, and recognizing and understanding that is the first point to actually seeking help. I know men are pretty poor at seeking help for physical health as well, but I think that changing that dialogue and having more people that are able to say, I had this issue and I was helped, or I'm in a different place now, a better place now as a result of speaking about it, just broadens that network beyond the immediate people within the network, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. What time? We've got 2 more minutes left of Mark's time. You've got a minute each for the next two. One is about military veterans and how we could use them more within the community. I don't know if Dan wants to just elaborate on that a little bit more, Dan, or? Is he with us? Are you there, Dan?
It's a seance all of a sudden.
It's a seance. Is anybody there? Right, shall we move on to the next one? Because Hazel's got a really good point about changing our environments to be more conducive to well-being. And funnily enough, Joanne did touch upon this about the use of parks. Was he there? Was he not?
That was Dan, I think, but I think he was on a bad connection. What I can say, Dan, is we've got your contact details. We'll be following up everything that's follow-upable from the comments, whatever that means. But yeah, we won't lose it. We'll be in touch, because I think this is it. I mean, you might be working for a local industry, and we can get in touch with you about your contacts within the military veterans, and that's the assets we can make blooming good use of as well. So
100%.
We'll be in touch.
Yeah, all of the comments obviously are all saved through my chat, and we will obviously take them all and address these, and probably send them all to Mark as well, because he'll probably be really interested to read through what people have said. So if we do the one quick last one, is about the environment. Hazel, are you there? And about the environment and changing the environments to be more conducive to well-being.
I am here. You're putting me on the spot now. Hiya, Mark. Pleased to meet you. I work at Teesside Uni. I'm the Wellbeing Coordinator. I'm also a member of the Healthy Universities UK network, and this comes up very, very regularly as an issue with regards to, obviously, we all know the benefits of the environment, whether or not you live in an urban area or an area with a lot more green space, needs to be conducive to well-being, and can have a humongous effect on your well-being and really make some big changes. But increasingly and repetitively, I have conversations about, we can't get through to the planners, we can't get through to the policymakers, we can't get policy into practice, and the planners don't understand what we're talking about. And I'm just wondering, have you got much experience of that within Middlesbrough and South Tees, and are there any sort of future kind of plans for improving the environment around Middlesbrough? Because we are starting to look at stuff for the campuses. Obviously, a lot's been going on the campus, but we still have issues with getting our estates powers that be sometimes to kind of understand what well-being's about, and how we can change our environment to make everyone's life a little bit better when they're using that space and being in that environment.
Yeah, well, there's a green strategy in Middlesbrough where there's a health work stream to it that's led by Catherine Parker in the public health team. So I'm sure Richie could connect you into Catherine into that element. And I completely agree with you about the importance of outdoor space. And one of the first points is safe outdoor space, isn't it? So be that fear of crime or whatever kind of litter or broken glass or whatever might be around, or if it's safe and navigatable, and you can hear the birds singing and relax and all that sort of stuff. I think I mentioned walking the dogs first thing. That it's really important, isn't it, to have access to that open space. And I guess that's part of what this group could potentially do in terms of lobbying for change where there's consistent issues around particular spaces. I think it's really important. We have, through You've Got This program, which is a Sport England program looking at increasing physical activity. We're trying to build better connections with planning and transport and various other bits of the council departments. And I think we've got a route that they're generally really interested. Actually, they generally want to engage and want to improve things. That there's a real big shared agenda. I think what we found is we talk a different language. So once we've picked our way through that and developed a shared language to go with the shared agenda, I think there's a whole raft of things that we could do to support. And also communities getting involved in that decision making is an important part of a sense of purpose and control, as we talked about right at the beginning, and how we might go about doing that. So there's a whole raft of elements in that question, I think, that can be improved by working better together.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Hazel. So right, I think we've come to the end now. We've overrun a little bit, so I think we'll probably have to bring it to a close. Like Richie said, we've got all the comments here, so thank you for everybody that's commented. I can take this off and I'll send it to Mark, and I'm pretty sure he'd be really interested to read what everybody's put. And if there's any specific questions, we'll ask Mark to have a response, and then we'll send it out to the whole network. And I think, because if you've come today and you've brought that issue up, that's going to be a key for our wellbeing network. This is exactly the kind of information we're trying to find. So thanks ever so much, Mark.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks for agreeing to make this a weekly thing, Mark, as well. That's above and beyond, personally, I thought, but I'm kidding. I think it's obviously it's been quite interesting, isn't it? It probably would be good to think we could do another one like this later. I think that it's quite a unique opportunity, isn't it? So
and I think that the network gives you the sort of heft to ask people to come and talk to a group of people that are interested in a really important area, and how to connect as a network into areas that perhaps at a distance you don't understand some of the decisions they're making, but with a conversation you might be able to understand that might help you influence them better.
And we are action oriented, aren't we, Sharon? I mean, look, there's 20 odd actions here, things that can happen that will impact upon, positive effect in our communities. So that is what we're about ultimately.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, normally your tour of duty would be going round and meeting
everybody. I know.
But you haven't been able to do it.
I've not been able to distribute my largesse on a tour of the.
You've been sorting some other rubbish out, some academic thing or some other that they say you do, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, Mark, thank you so much for today. And thank you to all the participants for taking part. Hopefully, like Richie says, we'll try and get another one set up later down the line. This is the last of our seminars today, but we are hoping to, now we know the tech works, even better. Keep the seminars rolling, and we'll be drawn upon you all in the future to even run your own session or bring the things that you want, and then we'll take it forward from there. So thanks ever so much. Did you want to say anything to finish off, Richie, or are you
done very well? Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, and thanks everybody for attending, and thanks so much, Mark. And we'll see you later, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. See you later. Thanks so much. Bye.